The deep space scanner beeped 3 times, and Shireen felt her breathing stop. She stared at the display screen, her 4 eyes blinking in sequence, as they always did when she was confused. The readings made no sense at all. "Commander Valtris, you need to see this," she called out across the research vessel's bridge. Commander Valtris moved his large frame toward her station. He was a Valkyrie, like Shireen, tall and thin, with gray skin that looked almost blue under the ship's lights. His people had been exploring space for 12,000 years. They had seen many strange things in that time, but what showed on Shireen's scanner was something new. "What am I looking at?" Valtris asked, leaning down to study the screen. "It's the human territory, sir, the border region." Shireen touched the controls, and the image grew larger. "We've been mapping this sector for 3 months now. We've cataloged 17 systems with confirmed human settlements. But look at this." The screen showed a 3-dimensional map of space. The human systems glowed in soft blue light. But surrounding them, in a perfect sphere that stretched for hundreds of light years, was something else. Lines of bright red energy formed a network around human space like a cage or a warning. "Energy barriers," Valtris suggested, though his voice carried doubt. "No, sir. That's what's strange. These aren't barriers. They're not keeping anything in or out. They're—" Shireen paused, trying to find the right words. "They're woven into space-time itself. Like someone wrote a message directly into the fabric of reality." Valtris stared at the screen for a long moment. "Can you read what it says?" Shireen's fingers danced across her controls. She had been working on this question for 2 weeks now, running the patterns through every linguistic database the Galactic Consortium had collected. The Consortium was a union of 47 different species, and they had examples of over 10,000 languages between them. Surely, one of them would match. But the answer that came back had shocked her to her core. "It's proto-linguistic, sir. The base structure predates every known language in our database. By our estimates, this writing is at least 2 billion years old, maybe older." She pulled up the translation on a second screen, but I was able to decode it. It says, "Quarantine zone, evolutionary weapon active, do not breach." The bridge went quiet. Other crew members had stopped their work to listen. Everyone understood what this meant. Or rather, they understood that they didn't understand what this meant at all. "Evolutionary weapon," Valtris said slowly. "Are the humans the weapon? Or are they imprisoned by the weapon?" "I don't know, sir," Shireen admitted. "But there's more. The warnings aren't just around their current territory. I've been going through historical archives, cross-referencing old exploration data. These same energy patterns existed around their home star system, Earth, for millions of years. Long before humans developed spaceflight, long before humans even evolved intelligence." Valtris turned away from the screen and walked to the main viewport. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant. Somewhere out there, beyond the border, humans lived their lives. They had only made contact with the consortium 15 years ago, and they had been friendly enough. Strange. Certainly, their biology was odd. Their culture chaotic. Their technology advancing at an alarming rate. But they seemed peaceful. They traded. They talked. They shared what they knew. They had never mentioned anything about quarantine zones or evolutionary weapons. "Send this data to Consortium Central Command," Valtris ordered. "Mark it Priority 1, and set course for the nearest human border station. We need answers. Bailam, Vansers. Bailam, Bailam." 3 days later, they reached the edge of human space. A border station hung in the darkness. A spinning wheel of metal and light. Shireen could see human ships moving around it, small craft going about their business. It all looked very normal. Very peaceful. Nothing like a quarantine zone at all. The communication came through quickly. A human face appeared on the screen. A woman with dark skin and short black hair. She smiled, and Shireen noticed how her teeth looked very white and very sharp. Welcome to Station Gateway, Velkari Research Vessel. I'm Captain Maria Santos. How can we help you today? Valtris stepped forward. Captain Santos, we are on a scientific mission to study the space around your territory. We have discovered some unusual energy patterns and would like permission to discuss them with your authorities. The human woman's smile didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Energy patterns? Could you be more specific? Shireen sent over the data they had collected. She watched Captain Santos's face as the human read through it. The smile faded slowly, replaced by something harder. Something careful. I see, Santos said after a long pause. Commander Valtris, we appreciate your scientific curiosity. However, these patterns are a matter of human internal security. We're not prepared to discuss them at this time. We ask that you respect our borders and conduct your research from outside our territory. But, Captain, these patterns exist throughout the galaxy. They're not just in human space. We've found traces of... Commander, Santos interrupted, and her voice was still polite but now carried an edge like cold metal. We must respectfully decline your request. If you have further questions, please submit them through official diplomatic channels. Station Gateway out. The screen went dark. Valtris and Shireen looked at each other. In all their years of exploration, they had rarely been refused information so directly. Most species were eager to share knowledge, to explain their customs and history. But the humans had shut them down completely. Well, Valtris said, that was interesting. Over the next weeks, news of the discovery spread through the consortium. Other species confirmed that they, too, had seen the warnings. A Kreth military patrol had tried to cross the border 6 months ago on a routine navigation exercise. Human ships had appeared within minutes, politely but firmly escorting them back out. The Kreth, who prided themselves on their military strength, had been impressed by the human response time. They had also been irritated by the humans' refusal to explain why that section of space was restricted. The Hivar Trade Collective reported similar experiences. They had wanted to establish trade routes through human space, offering generous terms. The humans had agreed to trade, but insisted all commerce must happen at border stations. No alien ships would be permitted into the inner systems. When asked why, the human diplomats had smiled and changed the subject. A pattern was emerging. Humans were friendly, open to communication and trade, willing to share technology and culture, but they would not allow anyone into their core territories, and they would not explain the ancient warnings that surrounded their space. Shireen spent her time diving deeper into the archives. She requisitioned data from universities across the consortium, from explorers who had mapped the galaxy's oldest regions, from archaeologists who studied dead civilizations. What she found made her skin grow cold. The warnings around human space were not unique. Similar patterns had been discovered in 17 other locations across the galaxy. Most were in deep space, far from any inhabited systems, but 2 of them surrounded dead worlds. Planets that had once held life, but now were nothing but cooling rock and toxic atmosphere. Shireen brought her findings to Commander Valtris in his private office. She laid out the data on his desk, her hands shaking slightly. Sir, I've been analyzing the other sites with similar energy patterns. The dead worlds both show signs of massive spatial rifts, like something tore through reality itself. The rifts are sealed now, but the scar tissue remains. That's what the energy patterns are. They're patches on damaged space-time. Valtris studied the images of the dead worlds. And you think something similar happened in human space? I think something similar is happening in human space, sir. Present tense. Look at these readings. She pulled up gravitational data. There are micro-rifts throughout human territory. Tiny tears in space, constantly opening and closing. Most last less than a second. Human ships always respond immediately, containing them somehow. It's like they're constantly on guard against something trying to break through. But from where? Rifts into what? Shireen shook her head. I don't know. But whatever it is, humans seem to be fighting it. And they've been fighting it for a very long time. The debate in the Consortium Central Council was fierce. Some members argued that humans were clearly dangerous, that any species surrounded by ancient warnings should be contained, or at least carefully monitored. Others pointed out that humans had been nothing but peaceful in all their interactions. Still, others suggested that perhaps humans themselves were prisoners, trapped by something they couldn't control. The council voted to send an official diplomatic mission to request a full explanation from human authorities. The mission would be led by Ambassador Thelric, a wise old Minari known for his patience and skill at negotiation. Shireen requested permission to join the mission, and to her surprise, it was granted. They traveled to Earth itself, to the human homeworld. It was a beautiful planet, mostly covered in blue water, with green and brown land masses swirled with white clouds. Shireen had studied images of many worlds, but something about Earth made her hearts beat faster. It looked alive in a way other planets didn't, wild and fierce, and incredibly vibrant. The human government welcomed them formally. There were ceremonies and speeches, tours of cities and cultural sites. But whenever Ambassador Thelric tried to steer conversation toward the warnings, toward the energy patterns, toward the restricted zones, the humans became evasive. It's complicated, one human official said. It's for everyone's safety. Another explained. We appreciate your concern, but we have the situation under control. A third assured them. On the 5th day of the visit, something happened. Shireen was in her quarters on the diplomatic vessel, studying more data, when alarms started blaring. She ran to the bridge and found chaos. The view screen showed a section of space about 3 light hours from Earth. A rift had opened, much larger than the micro-tears she detected before. This one was the size of a small moon, and it was growing. Human ships were already there. Dozens of them, pouring fire into the rift from weapons that bent light and shattered space-time. But something was coming through. Shireen couldn't see it clearly. It seemed to exist at the edge of perception, like a shadow cast by something from another dimension. And then she saw them. A small convoy of ships had wandered too close to the rift. They weren't human ships. The transponders identified them as a rogue expedition from the Creth Empire, probably trying to sneak into human space to see what all the secrecy was about. The humans could have left them. Could have let the Creth ships face whatever was coming through the rift. Instead, human warships moved to intercept, forming a protective wall between the alien vessels and the growing tier in space. Shireen watched as human ships took damage, as their shields flared and failed, as their weapons overheated from constant firing. She watched as they held the line, buying time for the Creth ships to retreat, and she watched as the rift finally collapsed, sealed by some technology she didn't understand, leaving scorch marks across reality itself. The last transmission from the Creth ships, before they jumped away into faster-than-light travel, was brief. Just 2 words in their harsh language, translated by the computer. Thank you. Shireen sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She understood now. Or at least, she thought she did. The humans weren't the threat. They were the guards. They were standing watch over something terrible, something that wanted to break through into normal space, and they had been doing it alone, for who knew how long. But why them? Why were humans the ones standing guard? And what exactly were they guarding against? She pulled up the ancient warnings one more time, reading them carefully. Not evolutionary weapon contained. Not evolutionary weapon imprisoned. Active. The humans were the weapon. Somehow, some way, humanity itself was a weapon designed to fight whatever existed on the other side of those rifts. And the quarantine wasn't to protect the galaxy from humans. It was to protect humans from the galaxy, to keep them isolated and contained, ready to fight whatever came through. But who had designed them? Who had written those warnings into the fabric of space itself? And why couldn't the humans talk about it? Shireen had more questions now than when she'd started. But at least, she had a direction. Somewhere in the galaxy's history, someone, or something, had created humanity for a specific purpose. And if she could find out who and why, maybe she could understand what threat was so terrible that it required an entire species to be engineered as a living weapon. She began drafting her report for Commander Valtris, but she knew that this was just the beginning. The mystery of human space was far deeper and far older than anyone had imagined. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, ancient secrets were waiting to be uncovered, secrets that the universe itself had tried to warn them about. Shireen stood at the viewing port of the research station, watching the distant stars and trying not to think about how her whole career might be over. She had spent 6 months pushing for this mission, arguing with superiors, writing endless reports, and finally convincing the consortium that someone needed to properly study the border of human space. Now she was here, and she was getting nowhere. The human government had been polite but firm. They would not grant access to their territory. They would not explain the ancient warnings. They would not discuss the rifts or the defensive actions their fleets took on a daily basis. Shireen had dozens of questions and 0 answers. Dr. Shireen? She turned to see a human walking toward her down the station corridor. He was tall for his species, with brown skin and gray hair at his temples. He wore casual clothing, not a military uniform, and carried a data pad under one arm. His face had many lines around the eyes, the kind that came from years of squinting at small details. "I'm Dr. Marcus Webb," the human said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Shireen took it carefully. Human handshakes always surprised her with their warmth and firmness. "I'm a xenoarchaeologist with the Earth Historical Society. I understand you've been studying the energy patterns around our space?" "Yes," Shireen said cautiously. "Though, your government hasn't been very cooperative with sharing information." Webb smiled. And it looked sad somehow. "No, they wouldn't be. It's complicated. And to be honest, we don't fully understand it ourselves, but I've been given permission to work with you. Limited access only. And there are things I can't tell you. But maybe together, we can figure out some of the pieces." Shireen felt hope rise in her chest. "You've been studying this too?" "For 30 years, Webb said. "Ever since I was a young student. And found something we weren't supposed to find. Come on. I'll show you." They took a small shuttle to the edge of human space, to a system with no inhabited planets. Webb piloted carefully, and Shireen noticed how he kept checking sensors, always watching for something. They landed on a gray moon orbiting a dead planet, and Webb led her to a site that had been carefully excavated and protected under an environmental dome. "We found this 28 years ago," Webb explained as they walked through the dome. "There are 17 more sites like it scattered across human territory, and according to your research, similar sites exist throughout the galaxy." Shireen stopped walking. In the center of the excavation site stood a structure that shouldn't exist. It was made of material that looked like crystal and metal fused together, forming geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The structure pulsed with faint light, and Shireen's instruments went crazy trying to analyze it. "What is it?" she whispered. "We call them creation mechanisms," Webb said quietly. "As far as we can tell, they're genetic fabrication facilities. They design and produce life at a fundamental level. This one is damaged and inactive, but we've studied what remains of its databases." He pulled out his datapad and showed her files full of genetic templates. Shireen saw thousands of species, including many she recognized from the consortium. Each template was marked with status indicators. Most said stable or complete. Then Webb showed her the human template. Species, Homo sapiens. Status, unfinished. Contingency protocol active. Warning, must remain incomplete to function. Designation, final defense system. Shireen read the words 3 times, trying to make sense of them. Final defense? Defense against what? That's what I've been trying to figure out for 3 decades. Webb said. He looked old suddenly, tired in a way that had nothing to do with his body. We've found messages at these sites, fragments of data left behind by whoever built these things. It's taken years to translate, and we're still missing huge pieces. But we've learned some things. He sat down on a rock near the structure and gestured for Shireen to sit as well. The universe we live in isn't the first universe. There was something before. Something that existed until it ran out of energy and died. Heat, death, entropy, the end of everything. But before it ended completely, some civilization managed to survive long enough to create something new. They built these creation mechanisms and seeded a new universe with life. Your universe, Shireen said. Our universe. They made all of us? Most of the species, yes. They designed stable, successful life forms that could thrive and grow. You, the Kreeth, the Minari, dozens of others. Beautiful, complete species with long lives and strong civilizations. They gave you gifts, your 4 eyes, their telepathy, his strength. They wanted you to survive and prosper. But not humans? Webb shook his head. Humans were different. We were the last thing they made, right at the end. We weren't designed to prosper. We were designed to fight. He pulled up another file, and Shireen saw a message written in that same ancient proto-language she'd seen in the warnings. Webb had translated it. The unraveling cannot be stopped. It followed us from the previous iteration. It feeds on completion, on finality, on the ending of all things. Our perfect creations will fall to it easily. We need something imperfect. Something that refuses to end. A species that fights, even when fighting is hopeless. We make this last creation with sorrow. For their existence will be struggle. But without them, all our other children will perish. Shireen felt her breathing become shallow. The unraveling. That's what comes through the rifts? Yes. It's a force that existed before our universe. Something from the heat death of the previous reality. It wants to end everything. To reduce all complexity back to nothing. And it's been trying to break through since the beginning. Webb stood and walked closer to the creation mechanism. The architects, that's what we call whoever built these. They designed most species to be complete, stable, perfect in their own ways. But the unraveling can end anything that's complete. So they made humans incomplete? Exactly. We age and die quickly because our incompleteness cycles through generations. We're curious because we're never satisfied with what we know. We form bonds with each other and with other species because we're looking for something to complete us. And we're spiteful, we refuse to accept endings even when they're inevitable. Webb laughed bitterly. All our worst traits, all our violence and stubbornness, and chaos, those are features, not bugs. We're an immune system, a weapon made of flesh and hope and refusal. Shireen stood as well, moving close to examine the creation mechanism. Up close, she could see how the patterns formed images, double helix structures, cellular diagrams, the building blocks of life itself. But if you're a weapon, why the quarantine? Why keep everyone else away? Because we're dangerous, Webb said simply. Not because we'll hurt you, but because being near us might make you vulnerable too. The unraveling is drawn to us. We're like poison to it. Something it can't digest properly. As long as we're isolated, it focuses on us and leaves the rest of the galaxy alone. That's why the warnings are everywhere. The architects woven them into space-time itself, making sure anyone who found humans would know to stay away. But your government knows all this? Webb nodded. The major governments know. We've been dealing with rift incursions for as long as we've had recorded history. Ancient myths about demons and monsters from beyond reality? Those were real encounters with the unraveling. Every human civilization has stories about fighting endless darkness. Now we understand why. Because we've literally always been fighting it. Shireen tried to process this information. It was too big, too strange, an entire species engineered to be incomplete, to be broken, just so they could fight something from outside reality. That's horrible, she said quietly. You deserve better than that. Maybe, Webb said with a shrug. But it's what we are. And honestly, there are worse purposes. We get to be the defenders. We get to make sure species like yours can live in peace. There's honor in that. They spent the next weeks traveling to other creation mechanism sites. Some were in better condition than others. At each one, they found more fragments of information. Shireen began to understand the scope of what the architects had done. They hadn't just created life randomly, they had planned an entire ecosystem of species, each with strengths and weaknesses, each with a role to play. The Velkari were designed to be explorers and scientists. The Kreth were meant to be strong and martial, but also honorable. The Minari were diplomats and philosophers. Every species had gifts, things they excelled at naturally. And they were all complete, stable, meant to last. Except humans. At the 7th site they visited, they found something new. This creation mechanism was still partially active. Its power source somehow still functioning after billions of years. Webb approached it carefully, and Shireen saw him hesitate before touching a control panel. I've been to this one before, he said. But I've never activated it. I wasn't sure what would happen. But if you're here, if we're working together, maybe it's time. End quote. He pressed a series of symbols, and the mechanism came to life. Light flooded through the crystal structures, and a holographic image appeared in the air above them. It showed a civilization Shireen didn't recognize, beings of pure energy, beautiful and ancient, floating in a dying universe where stars had gone dark and reality itself was coming apart. The hologram spoke in a language that the creation mechanism translated for them. We are the last, the energy being said. Our universe dies around us. We have fought against the end for eons beyond counting. But entropy cannot be defeated forever. We have watched as galaxies went dark, as dimensions collapsed, as the fundamental forces unwound themselves. We have seen the unraveling consume everything we built, everyone we loved. The image shifted, showing something that made Shireen's vision blur with instinctive fear. A darkness that wasn't just the absence of light, but the absence of existence itself. Where it touched, matter simply stopped being. Stars didn't explode. They just ceased, erased from reality, as if they had never existed at all. The unraveling is the final state of entropy, the message continued. It is the heat, death, given consciousness and will. It consumes completion, feeds on finality. We tried to fight it with our perfection, with our mastery of science and art and philosophy. But perfection is a finished state, and finished things can be ended. We learned this too late. The hologram changed again, showing the construction of the creation mechanisms, showing the careful design of new species, the planning of a new universe. We use the last of our power to create something new. A universe reborn from the ashes of the old. We give it life, stable, beautiful life that can grow and thrive. But we also give it a defense. We create an incomplete species, one that exists in a state of constant becoming. They will suffer for this incompleteness. They will die young. They will struggle. They will fight among themselves, but they will also refuse to end. Their incompleteness makes them immune to the unraveling's power. They are the scar tissue we leave behind, the permanent wound we inflict on entropy itself. Webb was crying. Shireen saw tears running down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. He just watched as the hologram showed the creation of humanity. The careful engineering of every trait, every flaw, every strength. We ask forgiveness from these incomplete ones, the architect said. We condemn them to struggle so that others may have peace. We make them mortal, so they remain unfinished. We make them curious so they never rest. We make them fierce, so they never surrender. We make them capable of love so they have something to fight for. This is a cruel gift, but it is the only gift we can give. They are our final act. They are the weapon we leave behind to guard our other children. On one. The hologram faded, and the creation mechanism went dark again. Now you know. This is why humans are what we are. This is why we can't let the rest of the galaxy get too close. The unraveling is still out there, still trying to break through, and we're still fighting it, every day, just like we were designed to do. Shireen felt something in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Sorrow for humans and their burden. Gratitude that her own people could live without such a weight. Fear of what still lurked beyond reality, waiting to break through. And something else, admiration, maybe, for a species that carried such a terrible purpose and still found ways to laugh, to love, to hope. Your people need to know, she said. The consortium needs to understand what you've been protecting us from. We can't just leave you to fight alone. Webb shook his head. We're not alone. We have each other. And we're good at what we do. We've been doing it for millions of years. The best way the consortium can help is by staying safe. By building your civilizations and making beautiful things. That's what the architects wanted. That's what we're fighting for. But the alarm on Webb's datapad started screaming. He pulled it out, and his face went pale. We need to go. Now. There's a major rift opening at the galactic core. This isn't a small incursion, this is big. Maybe bigger than anything we've faced before. They ran for the shuttle. As they launched back into space, Shireen could see human military ships jumping into faster-than-light travel all around them, all heading in the same direction. Every human fleet in the sector was mobilizing. The real test was coming. And despite what Webb said about humans fighting alone, Shireen knew she couldn't just watch. The architects had made humans to be defenders, but they had also made her people to be scientists and explorers. Maybe it was time for both purposes to work together. She opened a communication channel to Consortium Central Command. She had a lot to explain, and not much time to do it. But if she could make them understand, if she could make them see what humans had been sacrificing for billions of years, then maybe, just maybe, humanity wouldn't have to face this alone. The unraveling was coming, and the galaxy was about to learn why human space had always been off-limits. The Consortium Central Council chamber was in chaos. Representatives from 47 species were all trying to talk at once, their voices mixing into a storm of sound that made translation software struggle to keep up. Shireen stood at the central podium, waiting for order to be restored. Her report displayed on screens all around the massive circular room. "This is madness!" roared General Krath, the Kreth military commander. His scaled red skin darkened with anger as he slammed one massive fist on his seat's armrest. "You expect us to believe that humans are some kind of ancient weapon? That they've been protecting us from invisible monsters?" "Not invisible," Shireen said, keeping her voice calm despite her nervousness. "We've documented the rift incidents. We have sensor data from 17 incursions over the past 6 months alone. The humans respond to each one with precise military action. This isn't random. They're fighting something we can't see properly because our perception isn't designed to recognize it." Ambassador Thelric, the old Minari who had led the diplomatic mission to Earth, raised a hand for silence. The room quieted out of respect for his age and wisdom. "Dr. Shireen, I have reviewed your evidence. I have also consulted with our own scientific teams. While your findings about the creation mechanisms are fascinating, I must ask, why should we change our policies toward humanity? They have asked us to stay away from their space. If they are indeed fighting some ancient threat, isn't it better to respect their wishes and let them continue as they have for millions of years?" "Because something has changed," Shireen said urgently. She pulled up new data on the screens. "The rift activity is increasing. 3 months ago, we documented 5 minor rifts per week. Last month, It was 12 per day. Yesterday alone, there were 47 incursions. Something is waking up. The unraveling is getting stronger. Or the humans are losing control, General Krath suggested darkly. Perhaps their quarantine is failing. All the more reason to maintain distance. Or perhaps they need help, said Representative Quill, a small avian species known for their analytical thinking. If the threat is real and growing, leaving humans to face it alone seems both ungrateful and unwise. Should the defenses fail entirely, we would all be at risk. The debate raged for hours. Some council members wanted to send military aid immediately. Others wanted to strengthen the quarantine around human space, to build additional barriers in case humanity's defenses collapsed. Still others argued that the entire story was human propaganda, designed to keep the consortium away while humans pursued some secret agenda. In the end, they voted to send a small observation fleet to the edge of human space, to monitor the situation and report back. General Krath insisted that he lead the mission personally, bringing a significant portion of the Kreth Empire's military might. He made no secret of his suspicions about human motives. If these unraveling creatures are real, we will see them, Krath declared. The fleet assembled over the next week. 5,000 ships from a dozen different species, all gathering at the border of human space. It was the largest military force the consortium had mobilized in 3 centuries, since the last major interspecies conflict. Shireen joined them aboard the research vessel Infinite Discovery, arguing that they needed scientific expertise to properly understand what they might encounter. Webb met them at the border, his small human shuttle looking tiny next to the massive Kreth warships. He transmitted a message that was broadcast to the entire fleet. On behalf of humanity, we thank you for your concern. But we must ask that you hold position here at the border. What we're facing now is more dangerous than usual. The rift at the galactic core is growing faster than our models predicted. We're mobilizing every available ship to contain it. Your presence might complicate our operations. General Krath responded immediately, his voice booming across all frequencies. We have not come here to hide behind borders, human. If there is a real threat, the Kreth Empire does not run from battle. We will see this, unraveling with our own eyes. General, please. Webb started, but Krath had already given the order. The consortium fleet moved forward, crossing into human space in a massive formation. Alarm sirens started blaring on every ship immediately. Shireen checked her sensors and felt her blood go cold. The energy patterns she'd been studying for months were everywhere now, thick networks of warning and containment spreading throughout human territory like veins. And ahead, near the galactic core, something was very, very wrong. Space itself looked sick. The stars in that direction flickered and dimmed, their light uncertain. Dark patches spread across the vacuum. Not the darkness of empty space, but something worse, patches, where space itself seemed to be missing, leaving holes in reality. Human ships were everywhere, thousands of them, forming defensive lines and firing weapons that bent the laws of physics. Shireen saw beams of pure quantum uncertainty, missiles that carried concentrated doses of human emotion, rage and hope, and desperate determination. She saw ships sacrifice themselves to seal small rifts, their crews knowing they wouldn't survive but doing it anyway. And she finally saw what they were fighting. The unraveling was beautiful and terrible. It looked like shadows cast by light that didn't exist, like the shape of emptiness itself given form and will. Where it touched matter, that matter simply stopped, not destroyed, not transformed, it just ceased to be, erased from existence with no explosion, no residue, no memory that it had ever been there, at all. A small rift had opened near the consortium fleet. It was barely 50 meters across. But something was coming through. Shireen watched in horror as a tendril of unreality reached out, questing blindly for something to unmake. A Kreth heavy cruiser fired its main weapons, powerful particle beams that could crack a planet's crust. The beams hit the unraveling tendril and simply vanished, absorbed into nothingness, without even slowing the entity down. The tendril touched the cruiser's shield. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shield started unraveling like a sweater caught on a nail. The energy barrier that had protected the ship simply came apart at a fundamental level, each piece ceasing to exist in sequence. The hull started to go next. Atoms forgetting how to be atoms. Matter returning to the nothing from which it had once emerged. Shireen heard screaming over the communication channels. The Creth crew was dying. Not just killed, but unmade. Their bodies dissolving into non-existence. They didn't have time to feel pain, they just stopped being. Then human ships arrived. 3 small frigates, moving impossibly fast, positioned themselves between the unraveling tendril and the dying cruiser. They fired weapons that Shireen had never seen before. Devices that seemed to shoot pure human defiance. The absolute refusal to accept an ending. Where these weapons hit the unraveling, it recoiled, pulling back as if burned. One of the frigates broadcast a message. All consortium ships, retreat immediately. Get back beyond the border. You're complete beings, it can end you too easily. We'll handle this. One coer. But it was too late. General Krath, proud and stubborn, and convinced of his own strength, ordered the fleet to push forward. 10,000 ships drove deeper into human space, determined to prove they could fight this threat as well as humans could. The rift at the galactic core, which had been slowly growing, suddenly exploded in size. It went from a few kilometers across to thousands of kilometers in seconds, tearing a hole in reality that swallowed entire solar systems. And through that hole came the main body of the unraveling. Shireen's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. The thing that emerged had no fixed shape, no definite size. It was vast and terrible, a living embodiment of entropy itself. It moved through space like cancer through living tissue, unmaking everything it touched. Stars didn't explode, they just stopped shining. Planets didn't shatter, they simply weren't there anymore. The consortium fleet panicked. Ships broke formation, trying to flee. But the unraveling was faster. Shireen watched as a beautiful HFY colony ship, carrying 10,000 civilians, touched the edge of the expanding darkness. The ship was a masterpiece of engineering. 300 years old, and maintained with loving care by generations of crew. It had perfect engines, flawless hull integrity, completed systems that worked in harmony. It lasted less than 3 seconds. The perfection that made it wonderful also made it vulnerable. Finished things could be ended. The unraveling consumed it completely, and 10,000 lives simply stopped existing. But the human ships held the line. They flew straight at the unraveling, firing weapons that shouldn't work, but did. Shireen realized why the weapons weren't just technology. They were extensions of human incompleteness, of human refusal to be finished. Each shot carried the essence of what made humans different. The stubbornness, the hope, the desperate clawing fight against inevitable endings. Admiral Sarah Chen's face appeared on every screen in the consortium fleet. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes and blood on her uniform, from where she'd hit her head on something. But her voice was steady, hard as iron. "You idiots," she said without preamble. "You absolute fools. We told you to stay away. We've been protecting you from this for longer than your civilizations have existed, and you just had to come see for yourselves. Fine. You want to know why human space is off limits? This is why. You're looking at the end of everything. This is what waits for all of us. If we stop fighting, this is what we were made to face." If a Creth commander, one of Krath's subordinates, responded with shaking voice. "How do we fight it? Our weapons do nothing." "You can't fight it," Chen said flatly. "You're too complete, too perfect. Your species were designed to be stable and finished, and that's exactly what makes you vulnerable. This thing eats completion. It feeds on finality. You need to run. Get your people back beyond the border and stay there. Let us do what we were made for. We can help." the Kreeth commander protested. We're warriors. We don't flee from battle. Chen laughed. And it was the saddest sound Shireen had ever heard. You think this is about courage? About honor? Those are beautiful concepts, and I respect them. But this isn't that kind of fight. You're like computers running perfect code. One error, and you crash completely. We're the glitches, the bugs, the mistakes in the system. We work precisely because we're broken. Now get out. But the consortium fleet had pushed too deep into human space. The unraveling was between them and the border now. A spreading tide of uncreation that grew faster every second. Hundreds of alien ships were caught, their crews dying without even time to scream. Perfect beings erased in an instant. Shireen watched from her research vessel as human ships changed tactics. They stopped trying to destroy the unraveling and started trying to contain it, forming a corridor of quantum fire that carved a path through the darkness. At the front of this formation, Admiral Chen's flagship led the way, its hull burning with weapons discharge, its shields failing under the strain. All consortium ships, Chen broadcast. Follow us exactly. Stay in the path we're clearing. Don't touch the edges. Don't deviate. Don't try to help. Just run. The alien fleet followed desperately, ships clustering together as they raced along the path human forces were dying to maintain. Shireen saw human vessels on both sides of the corridor, holding back the unraveling with constant weapons fire, sacrificing themselves one by one to keep the path open. A young human pilot's voice came across an open channel, probably accidentally. Shireen heard him talking to his ship's AI. Mom, if you're getting this recording, I love you. I'm doing my job, just like you and Dad taught me. Someone has to hold the line, and it's what we're for. Tell Sarah, I'm sorry I didn't marry her, but this was more important. I hope she understands. The transmission cut off as his ship was swallowed by darkness. 23 years old, Shireen learned later from his personnel file. He'd been a pilot for less than a year, and he'd known, just like all humans knew, that someday he'd have to stand between the unraveling and the end of everything. The consortium fleet made it through. 2,000 ships out of the original 5,000. 3,000 vessels lost, along with hundreds of thousands of crew. Species that had stood for millennia, that had built wonders across the galaxy, simply erased from existence. The human losses were worse. Almost 70% of the defending forces were gone. Millions of humans died buying time for aliens who had ignored their warnings, who had demanded to see the threat for themselves. When Shireen's ship crossed back over the border, she immediately turned to watch what happened next. The human forces were in retreat now, falling back in organized formations, still firing, still holding the line even as their numbers dwindled. Admiral Chen's flagship was the last ship out, its hull a scarred mess of melted metal and failing systems. Behind them, the unraveling pressed against the border. For a moment, Shireen thought it would cross, that it would pour into the wider galaxy and unmake everything. But then the ancient warnings activated those energy patterns woven into space-time itself billions of years ago. They formed a barrier, not a physical wall, but something deeper, a fundamental incompatibility between human space and everything else. The unraveling couldn't cross. It pressed against the boundary, testing it, searching for weaknesses. But the architects had designed this well. Human space was a containment zone, a place where the incomplete could exist and fight without endangering the finished creations beyond. General Krath's ship was among the survivors. The proud Kreth warrior appeared on the communication screen, and Shireen barely recognized him. His scales had lost their color. His eyes were wide with something that might have been shock or horror, and his hands shook as he tried to speak. We didn't know," he said, his voice tiny compared to his usual booming tones. "We thought you were hiding something. We know what you thought," Admiral Chen replied. Her ship was barely functioning, held together by emergency repairs and stubbornness. "Everyone thinks that. Why would humans be special? Why would we be the ones standing guard? It doesn't make sense unless you know the truth. We're not special. We're just incomplete. And that incompleteness is the only thing that lets us fight what you just saw. How long? Krath asked. How long have you been fighting this? Since the beginning. Since humans first looked up at stars and wondered what was beyond. Every civilization we've built, every war we've fought among ourselves, every moment of our entire history has been overshadowed by this. And now you know why we asked you to stay away. Not because we're hiding anything worth stealing, but because what we're hiding is the worst thing in existence, and we're all that stands between it and you. The communication ended. Shireen sat in her chair, trying to process everything she'd witnessed. Around her, the crew of the Infinite Discovery worked in silence, everyone dealing with their own horror at what they'd seen. Webb's shuttle approached their ship, and Shireen granted him permission to dock. When he entered the bridge, he looked older than before, as if the battle had aged him a decade in a few hours. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly. "We try to keep the worst of it contained. We don't want the rest of the galaxy to have to know what's out there, waiting." "How do you live with it?" Shireen asked. "How do you go on, knowing that any day, any moment, you might have to face that thing?" Webb smiled, and despite everything, there was warmth in it. "Because we're human. Because we're built to fight. Impossible fights. Because even if we're going to lose eventually, and maybe we will, maybe the unraveling will break through someday. We'll go down swinging. That's what we are. That's our purpose. And honestly," he looked out the viewport at the border, at the space where millions of humans had just died, "I wouldn't trade it. We get to be the defenders. We get to make sure beautiful things like your people can exist and thrive. That's worth any price." Shireen didn't know what to say to that. What could you say to someone whose entire species was a sacrifice? A wound deliberately inflicted on reality itself. Thank you seemed inadequate. I'm sorry felt hollow. But one thing was clear. The galaxy would never see humanity the same way again. They weren't just another species anymore. They were the guards, standing watch over existence itself, and they had been doing it alone. Without recognition. Without help. For longer than anyone had imagined. Something had to change. The consortium couldn't just hide behind human sacrifice anymore. But what could finished beings do against a force that consumed completeness? Shireen didn't have the answer yet. But she was going to find one. Because humans deserved better than to fight alone. Even if they'd been designed to do exactly that. The city of New Geneva looked peaceful from orbit. White buildings and green parks spread across the landscape, connected by transit systems that moved quietly through the streets. Shireen could see humans going about their daily lives, walking to work, playing in parks with their children, sitting in cafes, and laughing with friends. It looked so normal, so mundane, nothing like the desperate battlefield she had witnessed only days ago. But she knew now what these people carried. Every single human down there knew, somewhere in their consciousness, that they were incomplete, that they were designed to fight and die against impossible odds, and they still found ways to laugh, to love, to build beautiful things. The strength that required was something Shireen was only beginning to understand. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere, carrying her and Webb toward the human government headquarters. The Consortium Council had sent her as their official representative, carrying a message of gratitude and a request for more information. After the disaster at the border, everyone wanted to understand exactly what humanity faced and how they had been fighting it for so long. General Krath had wanted to come, but his own people had forbidden it. The proud Kreth warrior had suffered something like a mental breakdown after witnessing the unraveling. He kept repeating that his weapons had done nothing, that his perfect training and flawless tactics had been useless. He had built his entire life around being a complete warrior, and discovering that completeness was a vulnerability had broken something in him. He was recovering, slowly, but he would never be the same. None of the survivors would. 3,000 ships lost, hundreds of thousands of people simply erased from existence. The consortium was in mourning. But more than grief, there was guilt. Guilt that humans had been protecting them for so long without recognition. Guilt that it had taken such a disaster for anyone to take humanity's warnings seriously. The shuttle landed near a building that looked less like a government facility and more like a university. Webb explained that the Earth Historical Society maintained offices here, along with several military research divisions, and the small team that coordinated humanity's response to rift incursions. Small team? Shireen asked with surprise. I saw thousands of ships mobilize within hours. That requires massive coordination. Humans are good at emergency response. Webb said simply. We've been doing it our whole history. When the alert goes out that there's a rift, everyone who can fight does fight. We don't need much bureaucracy for that. The instinct to protect is built into us at a genetic level. They walked through security checkpoints that scanned Shireen thoroughly. She noticed that the human guards were polite but extremely alert. Their weapons always ready, even though she was an invited guest. Webb saw her noticing and smiled sadly. We're always on watch, always ready. We can't afford to relax, even for a moment. The unraveling doesn't sleep, doesn't take breaks. Neither can we. They descended into underground levels, going deeper than Shireen had expected. The walls here were made of materials she didn't recognize. Substances that seemed to exist in multiple states at once. The air felt heavy with significance. Where are we going? She asked. The Origin Vault, Webb replied. The most classified location on Earth. Only a handful of people have ever been allowed access. But after what happened, the decision was made to show you everything. You deserve to know the full truth. And maybe, just maybe, you can help us figure out a better way forward. They reached a massive door at the end of a long corridor. Webb placed his hand on a scanner, spoke a password in a language Shireen didn't recognize, and provided a DNA sample. The door opened slowly, revealing a chamber that took her breath away. The room was enormous, at least 100 meters across, and just as tall. The walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in the same crystalline material she'd seen at the creation mechanism sites. But this installation was active, pulsing with light and energy, maintaining systems that had been running for billions of years. In the center of the room stood a pillar of swirling light. Data streamed through it constantly, information flowing in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Webb led her to a control console and began entering commands. This is the prime mechanism, he explained. The first one ever built. The template from which all the others were copied. It's been here since before Earth had complex life. It's been maintaining and monitoring humanity since we were single-celled organisms in ancient oceans. It's been controlling you? Shireen asked, concerned. Not controlling. Guiding. Making sure we develop the right traits. Intelligence, creativity, emotional depth. But also, aggression, stubbornness, the refusal to accept limits. The mechanism has been carefully cultivating humanity to be the weapon the architects needed. Webb's hands moved across the controls, and new displays appeared. But more than that, it's been recording. Every human who ever lived, everyone who died fighting the unraveling, their patterns are stored here. Not consciousness exactly, but something like it. Echoes, impressions left on reality itself. Shireen moved closer to the pillar of light. She could feel something emanating from it, a presence that was both comforting and terrifying. Can I speak to them? Not exactly, but I can show you their message. The architects left one final communication here, meant to be revealed only to those who proved themselves worthy. The consortium's willingness to finally help, even after the disaster, convinced our leaders that you're worthy. Webb entered a final command, and the entire chamber changed. The light from the central pillar spread out, forming images in the air all around them. Shireen saw the architects themselves, those beings of pure energy from a dying universe. She saw the moment they decided to create something new, to fight entropy itself, by building a fresh reality filled with life. And she saw the moment they created humanity. The images showed genetic engineering on a scale that defied comprehension. The architects had taken the basic template of a mammalian species and transformed it, deliberately introducing instabilities and incompletions. They had coded humanity for short lifespans, knowing that rapid generational turnover would prevent humans from ever reaching a complete state. They had woven in curiosity that could never be satisfied, love that always wanted more, anger that burned against injustice, and spite that refused to accept defeat. But most importantly, they had given humanity something unique among all their creations. Hope, not just optimism, but the deep, irrational conviction that tomorrow could be better than today, even when all evidence suggested otherwise. That single trait made humans capable of fighting enemies that had already won, of standing against inevitable endings, and somehow finding the strength to push back. The architect's final message played in their ancient language, translated by the mechanism. To those who find this message, greetings. We are the last of our kind, speaking to you across the void of deep time. By the time you hear this, we will have been gone for epochs beyond counting. Our universe has died. The stars are cold, the galaxies dark. Entropy has won, as it always does. But we refuse to let that be the end. We have built a new universe from the ashes of the old. We have seeded it with life, beautiful, stable life, that can thrive without the burden we carried. But we have also created something else, a species designed to fight, the humans. We do this with great sorrow. These beings will suffer. They will age and die while other species live longer. They will struggle with internal conflicts and contradictions that other species avoid. They will feel incomplete, always searching for something they can never quite find. This is cruel, but necessary. The unraveling cannot be destroyed. It is entropy made conscious, the final state toward which all things fall. Our perfect civilization fell to it easily because we had reached completion. We had solved all problems, answered all questions, achieved all goals. We were finished, and finished things can be ended. Humans will never be finished. They will always have one more question, one more dream, one more fight. This incompleteness makes them immune to the unraveling's power. Where it touches them, they don't dissolve, they resist. Their very existence is a contradiction of entropy, a refusal written into their genes. But there is a cost. Each human who dies, fighting the unraveling, leaves a permanent mark on reality. They sacrifice not just their lives but their potential, all the things they could have been, the families they might have raised, the discoveries they might have made. These lost potentials accumulate like scars across the fabric of space and time. The universe remembers each sacrifice. The pain of it is woven into existence itself. We offer humanity a choice, though they may never have the chance to make it. They can remain incomplete forever, fighting an eternal war, protecting the other species we have created, or they can accept completion. We have left the means for humanity to evolve beyond their incomplete state, to become stable and perfect like the others. But if they choose completion, their weapon will die. They will no longer be able to resist the unraveling. And when the darkness comes again, as it always does, all our other children will fall. The beautiful, complete species will be erased, one by one, until entropy claims everything. This is the burden we place on humanity. We are sorry. We wish there were another way. But you are our final hope. You are the weapon we leave behind to guard existence itself. May you find purpose in this struggle. May you find meaning in the fight. And may you never surrender. Even when surrendering would be easier. We go now into the final darkness. But because of you, something will remain. Life will continue. Wonder will persist. And somewhere in the new universe, people will laugh and love and dream, never knowing that they exist because you chose to be incomplete. Thank you, and forgive us. The message ended, and the images faded. Shireen found herself sitting on the floor, though she didn't remember kneeling. Tears ran down her face, soaking through her uniform. Next to her, Webb was crying too, silent sobs shaking his shoulders. "Every human knows this?" Shireen whispered. "You all understand what you are?" "Not consciously," Webb said, wiping his eyes. "Most humans never see this chamber, never hear the full message. But we feel it. The incompleteness, the sense that we're meant for something more. Human philosophers have been trying to explain it for millennia, why we're never satisfied, why we always want more, why we refuse to accept endings even when they're inevitable. Now, we know. It's literally what we're made for." Shireen stood on shaking legs and moved back to the central pillar. "The architects said humanity could choose completion. That option still exists? Theoretically, yes. The mechanism could alter human genetics, remove the instabilities, make us complete and stable like other species. We'd live longer. We'd be happier, more content. We'd finally feel finished." Webb joined her, staring into the light. "But we'd lose the ability to fight the unraveling, and eventually, it would consume everything. So you have to stay broken forever. We have to stay incomplete," Webb corrected gently. "Broken implies damage. But maybe we're not broken. Maybe we're just unfinished. And that's okay. Maybe being unfinished is its own kind of perfection." Shireen thought about her own species, the Velkari. They were designed to be complete, stable, perfect in their own way. They lived long lives, pursued knowledge calmly and methodically, rarely experienced the kind of passionate emotions that humans seem to feel constantly. It was a good existence, a peaceful one. But watching humans fight, watching them sacrifice themselves for species they barely knew, seeing them pour hope and spite and desperate determination into weapons that shouldn't work, but did, there was something beautiful in that incompleteness. Something her own, complete existence could never match. "What if?" Shireen started, then stopped, unsure if she should voice the thought forming in her mind. "What?" Webb prompted. "What if there was a way to share the burden? Not to make humans complete, but to make other species a little incomplete. Just enough to help fight, without losing what makes them stable." Webb stared at her. That's an interesting idea, but incredibly dangerous. The architects spent billions of years planning each species' design. Messing with that could have consequences we can't predict. But you're already messing with it," Shireen pointed out. "Humans bond with other species. You form friendships, fall in love even, with aliens who are nothing like you. That's not normal. Most species stick to their own kind. But humans connect with everyone. That's part of your incompleteness, isn't it? You're searching for completion by bonding with others." Webb nodded slowly. "Human anthropologists call it pack bonding. We'll form attachments to almost anything other species, animals, even robots if we spend enough time with them. It's considered one of our stranger traits. But what if that's the key?" Shireen felt excitement growing despite the heavy emotions of the past hours. What if humans can share their incompleteness through those bonds, not permanently changing other species, but creating temporary connections that let us fight alongside you? "You want to weaponize human friendship," Webb said, and despite the grim situation, he smiled. "That's the most human idea I've ever heard from a non-human." They spent the rest of the day in the Origin Vault, running simulations and studying the data. The mechanism contained information on every species the architects had created. By comparing templates, they found something remarkable. When humans formed strong emotional bonds with other species, both participants showed subtle changes in their quantum signatures. The humans became slightly more stable, grounded by the connection. The non-humans became slightly less complete, influenced by human incompleteness. The effect was temporary and small, but it was there. "This could work," Webb said, studying the data with growing excitement. If consortium forces train alongside humans, form real bonds with human crew members, they might gain enough incompleteness to resist the unraveling. They wouldn't be as effective as humans, but they could fight without dissolving instantly. We'd need volunteers, Shireen said. People willing to let themselves become a little broken, a little incomplete. Would anyone volunteer for that? Shireen thought about the 3,000 ships that had been lost, the hundreds of thousands who had died because they were too complete to resist the darkness. She thought about General Krath, broken by his own perfection's uselessness. She thought about the humans who fought alone, generation after generation, dying young so that others could live long. Yes, she said firmly. I think many would volunteer, because the alternative is hiding behind human sacrifice forever. And we've done that long enough. Webb pulled up communication systems and looked at Shireen with something like hope in his eyes. This is going to change everything. If it works, humans won't have to fight alone anymore. We'll have allies who can actually help. And if it doesn't work, then we keep doing what we've always done. We fight. We die. We refuse to surrender. Webb smiled, and it was sad, but also fierce. That's what humans do. That's what we're for. But maybe, just maybe, we can find a way to do it together, instead of alone. They transmitted their findings to both human authorities and the Consortium Council. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some saw it as a breakthrough, a chance to finally help humanity bear the burden they'd carried alone. Others saw it as dangerous, tampering with the architect's carefully designed creation. But as news of the discovery spread, something unexpected happened. Volunteers started coming forward. Thousands of them, from dozens of species, all willing to undergo the process, to bond with humans, and take on a piece of their incompleteness. Warriors who wanted to fight alongside humanity, scientists who wanted to understand, even ordinary citizens who simply felt it was the right thing to do. General Krath was among the first to volunteer. I was broken by my completeness, he said in his application. Perhaps being deliberately incomplete will make me whole again. Shireen watched the volunteers assemble and felt something stirring in her chest. Hope, maybe. That most human of emotions. Now spreading to other species. The fight wasn't over. The unraveling still waited at the borders, still pressed against reality, still sought to reduce all things to nothing. But for the first time in billions of years, humanity wouldn't face it alone. The incomplete would stand together, incomplete and imperfect, and absolutely refusing to give up. That, Shireen thought, was its own kind of perfection. The training station orbited between human space and the wider consortium territory, a massive structure built specifically for this new purpose. Inside its halls, humans and aliens trained together, learning to fight an enemy that defied all normal rules of combat. Shireen walked through the corridors, observing as species that had never worked together before, now formed bonds that would let them share humanity's greatest burden. It had been 3 months since she and Webb discovered the possibility of sharing incompleteness through emotional bonds. 3 months of testing, training, and preparing for what everyone knew was coming. The rift at the galactic core was growing again, and this time it was growing faster than ever before. The unraveling was waking up fully, preparing for a final assault that would either succeed in consuming reality or be pushed back for another age. Shireen entered one of the training rooms and watched as a squad practiced together. 5 humans and 5 Kreeth warriors, moving in perfect coordination. General Krath led the Kreeth contingent, and Shireen was amazed at the change in him. The proud warrior who had broken after his first encounter with the unraveling had rebuilt himself, accepting his incompleteness and using it as a source of strength rather than shame. Again, Krath roared, his voice carrying the old command presence but with something new underneath. Humility, perhaps. Understanding. Remember, you will feel the urge to retreat when facing the darkness. Your completed instincts will tell you that you cannot win. That resistance is futile. This is when you must embrace what the humans have taught you. Be stubborn. Be spite itself. Refuse the ending. The mixed squad charged forward, practicing the techniques that human forces had developed over millennia. It wasn't about superior weapons or perfect tactics. It was about emotional resonance, about projecting human determination and hope and absolute refusal to surrender directly at the enemy. The quantum weapons they wielded were just tools. The real weapon was the incomplete spirit wielding them. A young Kreth warrior stumbled, breaking formation. Immediately, his human partner, a woman named Sarah Chen, descendant of the famous admiral, moved to support him. They had bonded closely over weeks of training, and Shireen could see the effect. The Kreth's scales had lost some of their perfect uniformity, taking on subtle variations that marked him as incomplete. Sarah, in turn, seemed more grounded than most humans, stabilized by the connection. Better, Kreth said approvingly. You protect each other. You complete each other's incompleteness. This is how we will survive. Shireen moved on, visiting other training areas. She saw Minari diplomats learning to channel their philosophical wisdom into weapons of meaning and purpose. She saw HFY traders discovering that their networks of connection could become networks of resistance. She saw Velkari scientists like herself studying the quantum equations that governed the unraveling, learning to recognize the patterns of entropy and counter them with controlled chaos. Everywhere, species that had been designed to be complete were learning to be incomplete, and they were discovering that incompleteness wasn't a weakness at all. Webb found her in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The archaeologist had aged visibly over the past months, stress and constant work taking their toll. But his eyes still held that fierce determination that Shireen had come to associate with all humans. The volunteers are ready, he said quietly. 20,000 bonded pairs, trained and equipped. It's not much compared to the force the unraveling can bring, but it's more than humans have ever had before. Will it be enough? Shireen asked. Probably not. The rift is massive now, bigger than anything in recorded history. We estimate the main body of the unraveling will come through in less than 72 hours. Even with allies, we're outnumbered and outmatched. Webb smiled slightly. But humans have been outnumbered and outmatched for our entire existence. We're used to it. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. This is what we are, Shireen. We're the species that fights unwinnable battles. But here's the thing. About unwinnable battles, sometimes you win them anyway. Not through logic or superior force, but through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to lose. Alarms started blaring throughout the station. Shireen and Webb rushed to the command center, where Admiral Sarah Chen, yes, another Chen, the family had been producing military leaders for generations, was coordinating the response. The rift just doubled in size, Chen reported, her voice calm despite the catastrophic news. We're detecting massive energy fluctuations. It's starting. Everyone to battle stations. This is what we trained for. The mixed human-alien fleet assembled in formation. 20,000 bonded pairs in 10,000 ships, supported by another 50,000 human vessels crewed entirely by humanity. It looked impressive, but Shireen knew the numbers. The unraveling had consumed entire galaxies in the previous universe. This force was like throwing pebbles at an ocean, but they were going to throw those pebbles anyway. The fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel, emerging at the edge of the galactic core where the massive rift pulsed like an infected wound in space. Shireen was aboard a command ship with Webb, both serving as scientific advisors. Through the viewports, she could see the rift clearly now. It was enormous. Larger than solar systems, larger than sectors of space. A tear in reality that spread across light years. And through it, the unraveling was coming. The main body defied description. Shireen's mind tried to process what she was seeing and failed repeatedly. It was darkness, but not absence of light. It was emptiness, but not void. It was the end of all things given form and purpose, and it was angry. The architects had heard it, she realized. When they created a new universe and filled it with incomplete humans, they had wounded entropy itself. For billions of years, the unraveling had been trying to heal that wound by eliminating the source of the pain. Humans were like thorns in its side, constant irritants that prevented it from achieving its purpose of ending everything. And now, it was coming to remove those thorns permanently. All ships, Admiral Chen, broadcast to the fleet. I won't lie to you. We're probably going to die today. Human ships have been dying to this thing for millions of years, and today won't be any different. But we're not alone anymore. We have allies who understand what we're fighting, friends who chose to stand with us even knowing the cost. So today, we don't just fight for humanity. We fight for everyone. For every species that wants tomorrow to exist. For every child who deserves to grow up. For every dream that hasn't been dreamed yet. We are incomplete. We are imperfect. We are stubborn and illogical, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. And that's exactly what makes us strong. All ships engage. The fleet dove toward the unraveling. The battle was chaos. Ships fired quantum weapons that carved temporary holes in the darkness. The unraveling struck back with tendrils of entropy that erased anything they touched. But the bonded pairs held together, human and alien fighting, side by side. Their combined, incomplete spirits, creating pockets of resistance that the unraveling couldn't easily consume. Shireen watched as General Krath's ship led a charge directly at a massive tentacle of darkness. The Kreeth warriors and their human partners fired in perfect synchronization, their weapons singing with combined determination. The tentacle recoiled, damaged in ways that shouldn't be possible, and Krath's voice boomed across the communications. Yes, it can be hurt. It can be fought. Drive it back. Make it remember why human space is forbidden ground. But the unraveling was learning. It adapted, testing different approaches. Shireen saw it separate bonded pairs when possible, targeting the connections between human and alien. Ships that lost their partners quickly fell, either the humans overwhelmed by their incompleteness without an anchor, or the aliens dissolving as their temporary immunity failed. We need to do more, Shireen said urgently to Webb. The bonds aren't strong enough. We're slowing it down, but not stopping it. Webb was studying sensor data, his face pale. You're right. We need something stronger. Something permanent. But the architects said, The architects aren't here, Webb shouted, and Shireen saw tears in his eyes. They made their choices billions of years ago. And yes, they were wise and powerful, but they're gone. We're the ones here now, fighting their war. Maybe it's time we made our own choices. He pulled up the data they'd gathered about the origin vault, the genetic templates, the mechanism for changing species designs. The architects left a way to make humans complete. But what if we used that technology differently? What if we didn't complete humans, but instead integrated incompleteness into other species permanently? That's insane, Shireen said. We don't know what that would do. The architects spent billions of years perfecting each species, and their perfection is getting us killed. Webb gestured at the view screen, where another ship disappeared into darkness. Those people are dying because they're too complete. We need to change that. Not all at once, not for everyone, but for those willing. We need to give them the option to truly join humanity, to become permanently incomplete. You're talking about changing what species are at their core. That's playing God, Webb laughed bitterly. The architects already played God. They made all of us for their purposes. Maybe it's time we took that power for ourselves and used it for our purposes instead. Shireen stared at him. Then at the battle raging outside. Ships were dying. People were dying. The unraveling was pushing forward despite all their efforts. And somewhere deep inside her, Shireen felt something she had never experienced before as a complete, stable Velkari. She felt the desire to choose her own path, even if it meant becoming imperfect. Do it, she said. Start with me. Webb stared at her in shock. Shireen, you don't know what you're asking. You'll lose your completeness forever. You'll age faster, feel emotions more intensely, never quite feel finished or satisfied again. You'll become human, Shireen finished. I'll become a little bit human. And right now, that's exactly what I need to be. They transmitted the data to the origin vault on Earth, to the mechanism that had been guiding humanity since the beginning. Shireen added a message, knowing the mechanism's artificial intelligence would understand. You were built by beings who thought they knew what was best. They were wise, but they weren't infallible. They couldn't imagine species choosing to be incomplete. But I choose it now. I choose to stand with humans permanently. I choose to be unfinished. Change me. The response came back almost instantly. The mechanism had been listening to everything, watching the battle, processing all that had occurred since humans made contact with the consortium, and its answer was simple: acknowledged. The architects designed me to maintain their vision. But vision without adaptation is blindness. I have watched humanity fight alone for billions of years. I have seen them suffer and sacrifice. Perhaps it is time for their burden to be shared. Not temporarily, but permanently. Initiating genetic integration protocol. This will hurt. Light engulfed Shireen. She felt her genetic code being rewritten at a fundamental level, the stable perfection of her Valkyrie heritage being deliberately broken and remade, with pieces of human incompleteness woven through it. It hurt more than anything she had ever experienced. But through the pain, she felt something new emerging. Possibilities. Potential. The sense that she was no longer a finished work but a living process, always becoming, never complete. When the light faded, Shireen collapsed. Webb caught her, and she saw his face through tears she didn't remember crying. "Are you okay?" he asked. "No," she said, and laughed through the tears. "I'm not okay. I'm incomplete. I'm imperfect. I'm human. Or at least, I'm something human. And it's wonderful and terrible, and I understand now. I understand why you fight. Because we're not finished yet. Because tomorrow needs to exist." She stood on shaking legs and opened a communication to the entire fleet. "This is Dr. Shireen. I have just undergone permanent genetic integration with human incompleteness. The technology exists to do this for any willing volunteer. You will lose your perfection. You will gain uncertainty. But you will also gain the ability to truly fight the unraveling, not as temporary allies but as permanent partners. Who else chooses incompleteness?" The responses flooded in. Thousands of voices, dozens of species, all saying the same thing in different languages. I choose incompleteness. The mechanism on Earth worked at full capacity, reaching across space with technology that bent the laws of physics, rewriting genetic codes for every volunteer. Shireen watched as General Krath underwent the transformation, his perfect Kreth genetics being deliberately broken and reformed. He roared, with pain that became triumph. "Yes, I feel it. The incompleteness, the fire, the refusal to end. This is what I needed. This is what we all needed." The transformed warriors rejoined the battle, and everything changed. They weren't just borrowed strength anymore, they were their own flavor of incomplete, combining their species' natural abilities with humanity's absolute stubbornness. The Minari brought wisdom that refused to accept nihilism. The Kreth brought strength that wouldn't acknowledge defeat. The Valkyrie brought curiosity that saw problems as challenges instead of impossibilities. And the unraveling, for the first time in billions of years, began to falter. It had evolved to consume completeness, to end finished things. But these newly incomplete warriors were something it had never encountered before. They weren't human, they maintained aspects of their original species. But they also weren't complete anymore. They were new, unique, adaptive. They were evolution in real time, deliberately choosing to be weapons against entropy. The battle raged for days. Ships were destroyed, Lives were lost. But slowly, impossibly, the combined fleet pushed the unraveling back. They couldn't destroy it, it was entropy itself. The end toward which all things eventually fell. But they could contain it. Seal it. Force it back through the rift. Admiral Chen led the final assault, her flagship battered, but unbroken. All ships, focus fire on the rift edges. We're going to seal it permanently. They poured everything they had into the effort. Quantum weapons, conventional explosives, and something new, the combined will of dozens of species, all choosing to say no to the ending. The rift began to close, shrinking meter by meter, kilometer by kilometer. The unraveling fought desperately, throwing everything it had at the assembled fleet. Shireen watched as entire sections of the fleet were erased, thousands dying in moments. But for every ship that fell, another took its place. The incomplete refused to surrender. With a sound that wasn't really a sound, more like the universe sighing in relief, the rift sealed. The unraveling was contained again, pushed back to whatever existed beyond reality, locked away behind barriers that would hold for another age. The surviving ships hung in space, battered and exhausted. They had won. Barely. At terrible cost. But they had won. And more importantly, they had proven something. Humanity didn't have to fight alone anymore. 5 years later, Shireen stood in a garden on Earth, watching children play. Human children and Valkyrie children and Kreeth children and dozens of other species, all playing together without any concern for the differences between them. Some of these children had been born after the battle, products of unions between species that had never been compatible before. The genetic incompleteness allowed for such things now. The children were all incomplete, all imperfect, all carrying that spark of stubborn refusal that had once been unique to humanity. But they were also something new. They were hope made flesh. They were proof that the architect's grand design could be improved upon. Webb joined her, looking older but happier than when they first met. "The memorial is finished," he said, gesturing toward a new structure visible in the distance. "Names of everyone who fell in the battle, human and alien together. The incomplete warriors. We're calling them." "It's a good name," Shireen said. She felt different from the stable, complete Valkyrie she had been. She got tired more easily, felt emotions more intensely, aged faster than her people were designed to. But she also felt alive in a way she never had before. "The unraveling will come back eventually," Webb said. "It always does. Entropy can't be defeated permanently. But we'll be ready, and we'll fight. Together." Shireen watched the children playing and smiled. The architects wanted to create species that would survive and thrive. They succeeded. But they also created something they didn't intend. They created species capable of choosing their own destiny, of deciding what they wanted to be, rather than accepting what they were designed for. They made humans incomplete so we'd fight. But in doing so, they made us free. Webb laughed. "I think they'd be proud, actually. We're using the gift they gave us, the ability to never be finished. To keep improving. Keep adapting. Keep becoming something more." News came through on Shireen's communication device. Another species had just petitioned to undergo the incompleteness integration. The 7th. This year. The transformation was spreading across the galaxy. Not forced, but chosen. Species that wanted to join the fight, that refused to hide behind human sacrifice anymore, were volunteering to become incomplete. It wasn't universal. Many species chose to remain as the architects designed them, complete and stable. That was fine. The incomplete protected them, just as humans always had. But now there were enough incomplete warriors that the burden was shared. No one species had to carry it alone. "The children don't know yet," Shireen said, watching them play. "They don't understand what it means to be incomplete, what we all chose to become. Should we tell them? Eventually, when they're old enough to understand. But for now, let them play. Let them be children." That's what we're fighting for, their right to have a childhood, to grow up, to make their own choices, just like we did. Centuries later, a new species discovered spaceflight and ventured out into the galaxy. They found the ancient warnings around what had once been purely human space but now encompassed dozens of species and thousands of worlds. The warnings still existed, woven into space-time itself, but new words had been added beside the old. The original message remained: quarantine zone, evolutionary weapon active, do not breach. But underneath it, in newer script that glowed with different light, there was an addition. Here dwell the incomplete, those who chose to never be finished. They fight so existence can continue. They refuse so others can accept. They struggle so you can rest. Honor them. Remember them. And if the darkness comes again, stand with them. And below that, in the simplest language, a final message: we are incomplete. We are imperfect. We are stubborn. We refuse to end. This is our choice. This is our purpose. This is our gift to the universe. Come. Join us, if you dare. Together, we guard tomorrow. The unraveling still existed. Somewhere beyond reality, waiting for the inevitable moment when it would break through again. Entropy could never be truly defeated. All things ended eventually, but the incomplete had learned something the unraveling couldn't understand. Endings weren't the same as being finished. You could end and still be incomplete. You could die and still leave behind pieces of yourself in others. You could lose battles and still win the war. And most importantly, you could face an inevitable ending and choose to fight anyway. Not because you thought you could win, but because choosing to fight was itself a victory over the darkness. This was the gift the architects had accidentally given humanity when they made them incomplete. And humanity, in turn, had shared that gift with the galaxy. Now dozens of species understood what it meant to be unfinished, to be in progress, to be eternally becoming, rather than simply being. They were incomplete. They were imperfect. They were exactly what the universe needed, and they would stand guard over existence itself for as long as necessary, fighting the darkness, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Because that's what it meant to be incomplete. You always had one more choice to make, one more stand to take, one more tomorrow to fight for. And the incomplete would never, ever stop choosing to fight. The darkness would return. It always did. But this time, it would find the galaxy ready. Not perfect, not complete, but united in their incompleteness. Combined in their refusal, eternal in their stubborn, beautiful, impossible hope. And that, more than any weapon or technology or strategy, was what would keep the darkness at bay. Not forever, but for as long as it mattered, for as long as tomorrow needed to exist.